In her book, The Long Loneliness, Dorothy wrote, "All my life I have been haunted by God." And where did this haunting God lead her? To the life of simplicity and poverty with the poor, to solidarity with the outcast. This haunting God led Dorothy to jail because she spoke and acted for the rights of women and men, of laborers and workers. She was led to jail because she stood with the farm workers, and to prison because she would not tolerate the militaristic posture of this country. She was led ultimately to community, to love. This being haunted by God became for her a stupendous and extraordinary pilgrimage, a pilgrimage of faith. For sure, the Sermon on the Mount sums up the entire life and spirit of Jesus, and that is an invitation which Dorothy, with consummate conviction, accepted. She realized that love is an exchange of gifts, the gift of faith, and she in turn offered the gift of her life, lived in faith, given for us and thousands of others. The Sermon on the Mount, along with the 25th chapter of St. Matthew, the cornerstone of the Catholic worker movement, is not some general guide or optional outline. It is the very expression of the flesh and blood of Jesus, the incarnation of truth. Dorothy showed by her love that yes, the gospel is possible. Excerpts from the eulogy at the funeral of Dorothy Day.
I think where it said a great one, when we're feeding people they call us saints, and when we're protesting they call us communists, things like that.
That's not actually ascribed to Dorothy, that's Dom Camara. He was the Archbishop of Recife in Brazil.
Ah.
But it would, it would apply to Dorothy too. And
well, let's start with the concept of her movement.
Okay. The concept of her movement came from Peter Morin, who was a French peasant who had this idea, and he needed someone who would put it into action. And people said, well, you ought to talk to Dorothy Day. And so he tracked her down, and he talked to Dorothy Day, and she started it. But she always says he started it because it was his idea. And it was the idea of starting with a newspaper, an outreach, so that people had an understanding of the thinking behind the movement. And this happened in 1933, time of the Great Depression. And so they put out their first newspaper on May 1st, International Workers' Day, in 1933, and she named it the Catholic Worker because of the Daily Worker, the communist paper. So then she said, well, ours will be the Catholic Worker, and people were on the streets and they needed food and all this, and so she just started trying to address the needs of the people. Says that she didn't start a soup line, that the man that was giving out the clothing ran out of clothing, and he said, well, I don't have any more clothing, so why don't you come in and have a cup of coffee? And people started immediately lining up for a cup of coffee, and then that grew to making soup, and then she started letting people sleep on the floor in her apartment, and then one day these two women came. She only had men, and she said, and these two women said they had no place, so could they spend the night? And she said, well, as you can see, the place is full, and it's all men. They're even on the floor of the kitchen. And so they left. But shortly after that, one of them came back and she said, and where's your companion? She said, well, when we left here, we had no place to go. And she walked over to the train station and threw herself in front of a train. And Dorothy was overwhelmed by that. She took her last $5. She went over a couple of apartment buildings where there was a sign, and she rented another room to let more people sleep inside, and that was the beginning of her having hospitality houses. So she had the newspaper, and she was serving food and clothing, and so it evolved that she was doing the works of mercy, as in the Matthew 25. And by the end of her life on earth, she was doing it all.
If anyone comes to you hungry, you don't go and you don't say to him, "Go be thou filled, go be warm." You go ahead and see to it that he does get what he needs.
Word got around about this woman, and people started asking her to come and speak all over the country. And so she drove around the country. I mean, she didn't drive, but she was driven around the country to speak places. And then other people said, well, I think I can do that too. Mm-hmm. And so the houses started.
The voluntary poverty, well, the principles in her mind as to why that would be the best thing to do for genuine effectiveness.
Well, this would be an example. There's this much in the world, and it should be shared by everybody. And if a handful of people have this much, it doesn't leave much for the rest of the people. Mm-hmm. So if everybody just takes what they need from this pool, then everybody will be taken care of. That isn't the way it is. So she called it voluntary simplicity or voluntary poverty. And she only took what she needed. And so she never, another story is showing her feelings about wealth. Someone came and brought a diamond ring to her, and she knew its worth and all, but she went outside the house in New York, and she gave it to the first woman that walked by. And people were saying, well, why did you do that? We could have sold it and bought food. And she said, the poor need beauty too.
How nice.
Anarchy is a good thing, but it's looked upon in the world as a bad thing because of what has been attributed to anarchists at various times. Anarchy is working as a group without a head. Mm-hmm. And so for a very long time she was seen as the head of the Catholic worker, but she didn't see herself that way. And when she died, they ran an article, what will happen to the movement now that Dorothy's dead? Mm-hmm. And everybody thought the movement would die because she wasn't there. But the point was that she wasn't that kind of a head. She was a figurehead. People knew her as connected with the Catholic worker, but she didn't tell. Like when we were first in our early years, we owed a lot of money on the house on Cummings Street. Mm-hmm. And I wrote and I asked her, what should we do? And she said, one house can't tell another house how to run its business. She was an anarchist in so much as she was the head of a movement that grew beyond what she expected, and which didn't have headquarters or anything. Dorothy accomplished the unaccomplishable, I'd say.
The impression I had briefly going over work was that so many systems are unnecessary, and that if we somehow take personal responsibility, each of us, is better than relying upon a system that eventually will probably get corrupt anyway.
Yeah.
Already is corrupt. Just by the nature of it. doing for so many people when it doesn't even know them.
Personalism is a part of the movement that if you see something that needs doing, do it.
Yeah.
And if it's too big for one person, well then get some people to help you.
Mm-hmm.
But don't wait for the government to do it. Don't wait for the church to do it. Don't take the time to create a great big corporation that'll do it. Just get going. Just start. Do it. And so sometimes people have come to talk to us or to me about, I think I'd like to start a Catholic worker. How do you do that? And we always say, you just start. And some people get that and just start. And other people need so much direction.
Long ago, I read 2 books by Benson, a priest, English priest, and one of them, called Lord of the World, was figuring out what the kind of world we'd have if the good prevailed, and the other was what kind of world we'd have if the evil prevailed. Both were dictatorships. I suppose that's one of the reasons why the mass of people instinctively feel that world government is something to be feared. Who will be in control of it? And the richest, the most powerful, the strongest, and so on, they haven't much faith, you see. Having been in courts of law, if you've been arrested a number of times and are in courts of law, you don't find them on the side of the poor, you don't find them on the side of the exploited and the Negro, the minority groups. You find it very much a farce. I can't help but see over the years how easy a thing is triggered into hostility, and how little effect is being had, how little change is being brought about by something enforced by law.
The outline of what it is to be a Catholic worker, the principles followed.
So the idea is to, where you are, see the need, and figure out what you can do about meeting that need.